While millions of people are screaming at their televisions, painting their faces, and falling apart emotionally because 11 strangers lost a game, there's a massive group of people who simply don't care. And according to neuroscience, their brains might actually be wired differently. What you're about to hear will completely change how you see the sports-obsessed people in your life. Here's the thing nobody talks about. Not caring about sports doesn't make you boring. It doesn't mean you lack passion. And it definitely doesn't mean something is wrong with you. But there is something genuinely fascinating happening inside the brain of someone like that. Something fundamentally different from the 60% of Americans who follow sports religiously. Let's start with the obvious question. Why do so many people care so intensely? Humans are tribal creatures. For thousands of years, belonging to a group meant survival. Your tribe protected you from predators, helped you hunt, kept you alive. And sports? They're essentially modern tribes with better merchandise. When someone watches their team play, their brain releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone, the exact same chemical that makes you love your family. Their brain literally tricks them into believing these millionaire athletes are part of their clan. But here's where it gets interesting. People who don't obsess over sports often have what psychologists call lower tribal instincts. Their identity isn't as tightly bound to being part of a group. They tend to be more individualistic, more likely to feel that they don't need to belong to something larger in order to feel complete. And there's actual research backing this up. A 2019 study found that people with low sports interest showed significantly less us versus them thinking. In other words, they don't automatically despise the opposing team just because it's not theirs. But it gets stranger still, because what happens inside the brain of a sports fanatic during a game is legitimately remarkable. You know that feeling right before you open a present? That rush of anticipation? That's dopamine firing in your brain. Sports fans get that exact same hit during games. Every play, every possession. Constant microdoses of anticipation and reward. It is, in a very real sense, addictive. Studies using fMRI scans have shown that watching your team activates the same reward centers as gambling and other intensely compelling activities. And here's the crucial part. The uncertainty is what makes it so powerful. You don't know whether your team will win. That unpredictability keeps the dopamine flowing. It's called intermittent reinforcement, the most addictive reward schedule known to psychology, the same principle that makes slot machines so devastatingly effective. The mechanism is eerily similar to other forms of behavioral addiction. Your brain doesn't distinguish much between different sources of dopamine. It just knows it wants more. People who don't care about sports? Their dopamine systems simply aren't triggered by vicarious competition. And this might be genetic. Research from the University of Chicago suggests that variations in dopamine receptor genes can actually predict how much someone cares about competitive spectator activities. Think about that for a moment. Your complete indifference to whether the Lakers win or lose might literally be encoded in your DNA. But there's another layer to this. Sports fans experience something psychologists call basking in reflected glory. When their team wins, they say, "We won." When their team loses, it becomes, "They lost." Notice the pronoun switch? People who don't obsess over sports
are far less likely to engage in that kind of psychological distancing. They tend to be more consistent in their self-concept. They don't need external victories to feel successful.
Their self-esteem is more stable, less dependent on outcomes that are completely outside their control. Now, to be clear, none of this means one way of being is inherently better than the other. But there are legitimate psychological differences at play, and understanding them is genuinely fascinating. Here's something that sounds contradictory. Sports fans often score higher on certain empathy measures. They practice caring deeply about other people's struggles, even when those people are total strangers wearing their team's jersey. So why don't non-sports people feel that same rush of empathy for athletes? It comes down to empathy allocation. Everyone has a limited capacity for caring deeply about things. People who aren't drawn to sports often direct that empathy toward entirely different places: social causes, personal relationships, creative projects, intellectual challenges. A 2021 study found that people with low sports interest scored significantly higher in openness to experience and appreciation for art and beauty. They're getting their emotional highs from music, nature, ideas, creative work. Their brains are chasing the same fundamental reward: meaning, connection, transcendence. They're just finding it somewhere else. And let's be honest about something else. For some people, not caring about sports is actually a defense mechanism. Maybe they were humiliated in gym class. Maybe they felt excluded by sports culture growing up. Maybe they're pushing back against the aggressive competitiveness that often surrounds sports fandom. Maybe they simply never understood why grown adults scream at a television over a ball. That indifference might carry a backstory. Or maybe they just find it boring. Both are entirely valid. But here's the part that explains so much about why sports fans and non-sports fans sometimes genuinely cannot understand each other. It comes down to how you experience meaning. Sports fans find meaning in narrative, the underdog story, the comeback, the dynasty, the rivalry. It's compelling because it's unpredictable, real-life drama with genuine emotional stakes. People who don't care about sports often find that randomness meaningless. They think, why would I emotionally invest in an outcome I can't control, performed by people I don't know, in a game that doesn't affect my actual life? And they're not wrong. But neither are sports fans. It's simply two different approaches to the universal human need for story and meaning. One group finds epic narrative in a championship run. The other finds it in a novel, a relationship, a creative project, a scientific discovery. Researchers describe this as parasocial investment versus direct engagement. Sports fans build one-sided relationships with teams and players. Non-sports people prefer investing their emotional energy where there's actual reciprocity, where their care matters to the outcome, where they're participants rather than spectators. Neither approach is superior. They're simply different strategies for navigating the human experience. Psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who spent decades studying optimal experience, found that flow states, those moments of complete absorption, can be achieved through countless activities. For some people, it's watching sports. For others, it's literally anything else. And here's what's genuinely striking. People who don't obsess over sports often report feeling more present in their own lives. They're not spending 3 hours every Sunday experiencing someone else's struggle. They're engaged in their own. There's something quietly radical about that. So what does all of this mean? If you don't care about sports, you're not missing out on some fundamental human experience. You're just different. Your brain's reward system, your tribal instincts, your empathy allocation, they're all calibrated differently. And that is perfectly fine. The next time someone asks, "Did you see the game?" and you genuinely could not care less, remember this. You're not broken. You're not boring. You're just playing a different game entirely. One that might, just maybe, have higher stakes.